very good afternoon. And so we get into the markets. Asian markets were mixed amid trade tariff uncertainty, with Australia's market said to have lost some ground on the back of negative trade data. Market players are keenly awaiting the US non-farm payroll jobs number out tomorrow, which could give a clue as to whether US interest rates could be cut imminently. The Nikkei share average rose by 0.06%. The Hang Seng index declined by 0.63%, while the Shanghai Composite Index rose by 0.2%. All right, US stocks were mostly up yesterday. This as market players digested fresh economic data, kept a close eye on global trade negotiations as well as corporate activity. President Donald Trump announced a new trade deal with Vietnam, imposing an import tariff of 20% on the country, much lower than Trump's original Liberation Day position of 46%. Uncertainty remained around whether the US could tie up firm up trade deals with the likes of the European Union and Japan, with the overall 9 July tariff deadline date looming. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed down 0.02%. The S&P 500 hit a record high, rising by 0.5%, while the Nasdaq Composite Index advanced by 0.94%. All right, looking at local indicators, we see that the All-Share Index is down 0.4% at 97.36 index points. On the currency front, we see that the Rand is trading at 20.64 against the Euro, 23.91 vis-a-vis the British Pound. Gold is trading at $3,350 an ounce, platinum at $1,376 an ounce, while Brent crude oil is trading at $68.33 a barrel. All right, let's get into conversation now with Lindile Malgas. He's a portfolio manager at ABSA Investments. Thanks very much for joining us, Lindile. So it seems that all eyes are on the US non-farm payroll numbers that are due out tomorrow. That's for the month of June. What's the expectation? And just tell us how this may relate to any interest rate decisions down the line.
Well, the numbers are coming out today. Markets are expecting a figure of around 110,000, and that is an easing from the previous figure of around 139,000. So you are seeing a moderation within job growth. And then from an unemployment point of view, markets expecting a slight uptick within unemployment to about 4.3%, and the Fed does watch unemployment numbers quite closely, but I do think that it certainly, the data that are coming out certainly won't have much of an impact. I think what has been interesting has been the inflation figures. Those have ticked up slightly, but still remaining close to the Fed's target. And the Fed has said that they will approach interest rates quite cautiously, particularly given that the tariffs do pose an inflationary risk. So they are pricing in about a 50 basis point in cuts this year. Markets expecting slightly bigger, around 75 basis points.
Yeah. In reality, how are market players responding to the US-Vietnam trade deal? Because 20% import duty is still very high, and perhaps it can give us a sort of an idea of what it might mean for other developing markets like South Africa when a decision is made on the 9th of July.
Yeah, so from the US-Vietnam trade deal, quite good to see that they have finally come to a deal. And then if you're looking at the market reactions, the Vietnamese markets actually closed slightly higher yesterday, so up about 0.3%. Then if you're looking at the broader Asian equities, those were a bit mixed. And then from a US perspective, those were marginally higher. But I think in the US market will be putting their focus on the non-farm payrolls. And then just looking at the deal, there was a 20% tariff imposed on Vietnamese goods, and then a 40% tariff on goods that pass through Vietnam. So from what we are seeing now, and if you look at some of the developing countries, I think there's still a lot of uncertainty. I think it will go by a country basis, and hence there still remains a bit of uncertainty around the tariffs. And the tariffs are actually higher than what we saw during the 3-month pause. So quite a bit of uncertainty, and it does, I think, go on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. So what's the backstory to the performance of the local currency? It seems to be a bit firmer against major currencies today.
Yes, so it has been quite strong since the start of the year. So it has stayed below 18 Rand to the dollar. I think from a dollar perspective, it has been mainly been driven by a weakening dollar. So we've seen even some of the major currencies performing better against the dollar. But if you're looking at the Rand's performance, against the euro and the pound, it's still a bit weaker. So I think the main driver has been the dollar performance. But then from our perspective, there's been improved sentiment around the local economy. So seeing from the tabling of the budget, so the budget being passed, and then also benefiting from a more positive current account balance, that being boosted by higher gold prices as well. So quite a few positives that have boosted the rand's strength so far.
So yesterday, a report came out from the Bureau of Economic Research on inflation. It's the one that the Reserve Bank always refers to. They noted that key players in the market, that is analysts, employers, as well as labor unions, saw inflation coming down this year relative to last year. I suppose this will be quite beneficial for the Reserve Bank, given that they're trying to bring down the inflation target.
Yes, so it actually came down for a second consecutive quarter, which is good. And then from a SABC perspective, they had already lowered their inflation expectations for this year. And I think the inflation expectation from the Bureau of Economic Research is quite good, particularly given that a lot of businesses, when they are planning for the future, they tend to use those inflation expectations, and that filters into prices. So quite good from an inflation perspective. And they are expecting inflation to come in below our 4% for this year. And then they've also revised the inflation expectations for 2026 and 2027 are lower, and they expect that to remain around the midpoint of the Reserve Bank's target. So they're quite good from an inflation perspective as well.
All right, Lindile, thank you very much. Let me say goodbye to you properly this time. That was Lindile Maugas. He's a portfolio manager and an investment strategist at ABSA Investments.